Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Council Chambers here for today's council meeting. It is May the 30th, 2017, and we first acknowledge we're on the unceded homelands of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Thankful to all the Coast Salish peoples for their fine hospitality over the generations. And I'll ask Madam Clerk for the roll call, please.
Mayor Robertson's in the chair. Councillor Louie. Councillor Stevenson is on leave of absence for civic business. Councillor Deal. Councillor Jang. Councillor Reimer. Councillor Meigs. Councillor Ball is absent from the chamber. Councillor Carr. Councillor Affleck. And Councillor DeGenova is on a medical leave. Mr. Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. First on the agenda, Council is required to meet in camera later this week. The reasons and authority under the Vancouver Charter are listed in the agenda. Would someone like to move that motion? Councillor Deal. Louis seconds. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that carries. We will go in camera at noon during our lunch break. And next up is minutes from the regular council meeting May the 16th, 2017. Any corrections to those? No corrections. Councillor Deal moves adoption. A seconder. Louis seconds. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. From second minutes are from the public hearing May the 16th, 2017. Any corrections to those? Councillor Deal will move adoption. And a seconder. Councillor Jang. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Minutes 3 are from the regular council meeting following the Standing Committee on City Finances and Services. That was May 17th. Any corrections? Councillor Deal moves. Councillor Louis seconds. All those in favor of adoption? Any opposed? And that carries. All our minutes are adopted from the last set of meetings. So we're looking at our council's consent agenda items. We have 2 administrative reports on the agenda. And I'll ask if members of council wish to hold either of those reports for debate or questions of staff. Does any member wish to declare a conflict of interest on any of those items? No conflicts. Councillor Louis will move adoption of the recommendations in those 2 reports. Councillor Deal will second. Any debate on the consent agenda to adopt the recommendations in our 2 administrative reports? We're ready for the question. All those in favor of adoption? Any opposed? And that carries. So we have just approved the recommendations in the following reports. Administrative Report 1, which is 2017 Property Taxation, Revised Taxation Bylaws and Averaging Resolutions. And the second report, 2017 Downtown Eastside Capital Grant Program Allocation. Those are approved. And that means we're on to our 1 report reference, which is regarding the False Creek South Planning Terms of Reference. And we have Gil Kelly here, our General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability, to present. Welcome, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor, and good morning, Council. I'm going to make some very brief remarks and then turn it over to Karis Hebert, Senior Planner, who is the Project Manager on the False Creek South Planning Project. I wanted to note that we're here today to update you on the city's work in False Creek South and to recommend that you adopt a terms of reference document for the neighborhood planning process that will get underway almost immediately after you take your action today. There will be work going on over the summer with a sort of more formal launch of activities in September. I would just note that the neighborhood we've all come to recognize through conversations with the residents there and others represents a very unique piece of the Vancouver landscape, a very intentionally created neighborhood in the 70s and 80s for residential property and a minor amount of commercial property that was made available to residents and business operators on city-owned land through long-term ground leases. And while those leases don't expire for another 20 to 30 years in most cases, the council has recognized that the end of term of those leases is presenting challenges for homeowners and businesses there. And so you'll recall that when we were last here, we recommended to you a kind of dual process moving forward with a planning process to help determine the future of the neighborhood and particularly its beginning with its periphery, or what you'll hear in a moment about phase one, at the same time that we work through our real estate and finance or facilities management arm to begin to resolve the lease questions. So those processes are moving in parallel, along with a couple of other streams of effort, including exploring affordable options to remain for residents. So this presentation today is really going to focus on the planning process, but we'll acknowledge those other streams in process as well. I think that's really the key point that I'll make, because Karis is really going to go into the detail, and we're here to answer questions after. But I think that I would say one thing, we've worked a lot with the neighborhood organization Replan in terms of the terms of reference, and I would acknowledge that there's a continuing anxiety about the resolution of at least a lease negotiation framework, which will need to be done in parallel, and for which substantial progress will need to be made for the confidence in the planning process to remain intact. So we're aware of that tension, and I think we're all the city agencies and Replan are working together to bring those parallel streams of effort moving in a coordinated fashion going forward. So with that, let me introduce Karis, who's going to walk you through a presentation that details out the terms of reference and how the planning process will run in parallel with those other streams of efforts. Karis?
Thank you, Gil. Good morning, Mayor and members of Council. My name is Karis Hebert, and I'm a Senior Planner in the Midtown Division of Planning, Urban Design, and Sustainability. I'm pleased to be here today to present the key elements of a terms of reference for the neighborhood planning process for Falls Creek South. And with Council's approval today, we will commence alongside the other Falls Creek South work streams. In this presentation, I'm going to walk you through some of the background and context for the planning work that is being proposed today, and cover the terms of reference that's in Appendix A of the report before you, concluding with our next steps, and then I'll pass it over to Bill Aujala, General Manager of Real Estate and Facilities Management, who will provide updates on the Falls Creek South work streams that are related to lease discussions. The Falls Creek South neighborhood is in the Fairview local area between Burrard and Cambie Bridge on the south shore of Falls Creek. It's approximately 136 acres and has a resident population of about 5,400. The turquoise boundary shown on the slide shows the outline of the Falls Creek South study area, which closely aligns with the outline of the official development plan that was adopted for this area in 1974. Originally a marshland and then an industrial use, the Falls Creek South of today is very much a product of people's imaginations. It was a pioneer neighborhood that demonstrated the potential of transforming inner city industrial lands into livable, walkable neighborhoods and recreational uses. In its day, it was an experiment aimed at enticing families to live at higher densities as opposed to the suburbs through complete community design. The experiment was very much led by the City of Vancouver as the primary landowner. 80% of the land in this area, as shown in the maroon color on this slide, is owned by the city through the Property Endowment Fund. Private lands are shown in red. Federal government owns waterfront land at Fisherman's Wharf to the west, and the Squamish Nation owns the land near the Burrard Bridge, shown in orange. The Vancouver School Board of Education owns the Falls Creek Elementary School, shown in yellow. The area was developed into mixed residential uses between 1974 and 1982, resulting in about 3,200 residential units. The master plan called for a mix of 1/3 non-market, 1/3 middle income, and 1/3 market housing, as well as local serving commercial in a park-light setting with 3 kilometers of seawall. The city leased its lands largely for a term of 60 years with a view to enabling future redevelopment as well as to ensure affordability and a mixture of incomes. The land has been estimated to represent about 15% of the value of the PEF, so it is a significant asset for the City of Vancouver and its public, as well as the community that lives there. This graphic breaks down the residential tenancies into market and non-market units on city lands and also shows the portion on private lands. As noted in previous reports to Council, the City wears multiple hats in this area. It's both a policymaker and regulator in undertaking a neighbourhood plan and the housing policy work associated with it. It's also a manager of a long-term public asset and needs to consider citywide perspectives in making decisions about land governance as well as financially sustainable development decisions. It is a lease manager that is discussing lease issues with current residents and undertaking building condition assessments. Today, a primary subject is the approval of the terms of reference for the planning process, which includes development of a residential protection and retention plan for residents on city land. The report also updates the progress of work on land governance and lease management updates. The False Creek South work streams can be distilled to about 5: neighborhood planning and housing policy that will evolve with planning, strata lease issues, co-op and non-market housing planning, and long-term governance questions. This, per Council's direction in January, we have refined our ideas about how to run a planning process in parallel with the other work streams. This graph plots the work streams alongside each other, noting that we anticipate 2 phases of planning work. Phase 1, which I'm going to explain in a bit more detail in the coming slides, will develop community-wide planning principles, as well as focus on detailed planning for infill sites on the community edge and housing policy related to that scope. While discussions on strata lease issues and planning with co-ops and non-market sites are given a chance to gain some clarity. The yellow band on this graph, labeled opt-in and opt-out of Phase 2 planning, indicates a period in which decisions will be made by the landowner and residents about undergoing detailed planning for Phase 2 on tenanted sites within the area. Staff will be in a position after this period to recommend either expansion of the neighborhood planning program or lease modifications. In arriving at this approach, staff have worked closely with the False Creek Neighborhood Association, which was established at the outset of the neighborhood. It has formed a subcommittee called Replan, who has engaged the city to talk about lease issues with a view to enabling the community to evolve and diversify. Replan, as Gil noted, has been clear in articulating that security of tenure is top of mind for residents, but have acknowledged the need for staff to develop recommendations for all the False Creek South work streams in a thorough way that's inclusive of citywide perspectives. Moving to the terms of reference, I'd first like to note that there was an error in Appendix A under the context statement, page 6 of 24, which the clerk has corrected. It noted that False Creek South previously noted that False Creek South had one of the lowest densities of children in the city, a statement that was removed. False Creek South does have a lower per capita population of children than other areas of the city, but not density due to its neighborhood form. Some of the objectives of the planning process include creation of community-wide planning principles that recognize the strengths of this neighborhood while seeking to address current challenges related to affordable housing, transportation, planning, and growth. We'd also like to retain affordable housing and accommodate additional housing and address the street environment along the community edge, which could be improved, explore ways to green the community, and as noted, the phased approach to planning will allow for an opt-in choice for tenanted sites that will be defined. This slide indicates the geographical scope that we've settled on for Phase 1. The area in red is the entire study area for which we will develop community-wide planning principles. And then we will be shifting our attention to doing detailed planning in the area that's shown in purple. The focus area for detailed planning has been further broken down into sub-areas that are indicated by numbers. Number 1 is the transit station area, which is adjacent to the Cambie Bridge and adjacent to the Cambie Bridge and contains surface parking, a parking structure and tennis courts, a small strata, and the bus loop. Sub-area 2 is a stretch of 6th Avenue, the former rail right-of-way in Charleston Road. The focus of work in this area is going to be to examine the future of the streetcar, seaside bikeway, and improving connectivity to False Creek South. And sub-area 3, which covers areas that has existing residential and commercial uses and underdeveloped sites. Land uses and densities, as well as future connection to the Arbutus Greenway to the seawall, will be a focus. Appendix A basically covers in greater detail the bullets on this slide, the context statement, study area, principles, which Council have adopted for the overall work streams. We will be developing planning principles, as I note, but they're referenced, and products, process and schedule, and civic engagement. The work plan is further detailed in Appendix A, but basically over the next 7 months, we expect to launch the planning program and engage with the community and citywide perspectives to develop the planning principles for False Creek South and provide a real focus on a resident protection and retention plan for city-owned land. This work will advance discussions with residents about resident protection and retention so that people are aware of what kinds of options and have a feeling of security for a place for them as we consider the future. Step 2 of phase 1 will focus on detailed planning for the community edge, which will be developed via a design charrette and will integrate preliminary costing of options. At the same time, as indicated on the bottom row of the graph, discussions with co-ops and non-market regarding leases and strata lease discussions will help define the parcels which may be included in phase 2 planning. We expect to give an update report to Council in July of next year, and after that time we will be bringing forward recommendations to Council about continuation of the planning program and or approach to lease modifications. There are 3 key topics of focus anticipated. Housing it's been noted that False Creek South represents a diverse and significant stock of affordable housing on city land. We expect that the discussion of housing will involve current levels of affordability in the community and future needs. We also note that the community profile has grown older with fewer families and children, although it has a significant stock of family housing, 2+ bedrooms. And so we expect that the discussions will focus on the potential to accommodate new families and look for the need for housing appropriate for aging in place. The Resident Protection and Retention Plan will develop options that build upon city supports and identify policy gaps. To address the breadth of future possibilities, options are going to be designed to address scenarios that include relocation due to building renovation or redevelopment, as well as displacement due to potential costs of new leases. We expect that the plan will provide guidance to other work streams and emerging plans about how to support resident and community retention across city roles. The protection and retention plan is going to be advanced early in the planning process so that early conclusions can inform planning for the community edge, opt-in decisions for phase 2 and other False Creek South work streams. Another area of focus will be neighborhood character. We know from early discussions with the residents that they feel strongly about their neighborhood character and love its abundant green spaces and mid-scale building design. In developing the planning principles, a balance needs to be struck between respecting the most essential qualities of False Creek South and accommodating additional population and housing within the city center close to transit, existing community amenities, and social services. I should note also that a review of public spaces is going to be part of the phase 1 work, noting that False Creek South is home to many unique public spaces, including Charleston and Suffolk Park, Leg and Boot Square, and the seawall, which may result in some community-wide principles and directions. A third area of focus will be transportation and connectivity. As mentioned, there's an opportunity to re-examine the design of 6th Avenue, the former rail right-of-way and internal road networks that are part of the False Creek South area, and that really create a barrier to pedestrian, bike, and vehicular movement. We will seek to create efficiencies in rethinking this infrastructure while accommodating the seaside bikeway, the future streetcar and goods movement. And a goal will be to increase connectivity from False Creek South to its surround. The engagement approach outlined in the planning program is comprehensive and uniquely inclusive of citywide perspectives, given the PEF's majority ownership of this land. The process proposes the creation of an advisory group that will help staff plan and execute engagement, review planning principles and planning products as they emerge, and reflect diverse perspectives. The slide outlines the perspectives that staff are seeking in a planning advisory group, and this is detailed further in Appendix A, building from representation of the residents, businesses, and community service providers in the area, adjacent neighborhoods, and other citywide perspectives. We recommend that the advisory group be limited to 20 to 25 to allow for a breadth of community interests as well as a strong diversity of citywide perspectives, but not too large to lose focus. Finally, the budget for this planning program reflects hiring for 3 positions, a project planner, a planning analyst, and a housing policy planner for a period of 14 months, the anticipated length of the Phase 1 planning program, along with required consultancies and process costs. So in conclusion, with approval of the False Creek South planning terms of reference, staff will commence early activities, including a planning launch on June 22nd, and preliminary work on a resident protection and retention plan, which will provide a focus for the summer months. Approval of recommendation B1 will enable staff to put out a call for nominations for the advisory group, and staff's intention will be to report back with the recommended group in the fall of this year. Staff will also continue to progress work items to address the end of lease issues for city-owned land, and I will now turn it over to Bill Aujala, General Manager for Real Estate and Facilities Management, to provide an update on the progress of this work. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Bill Aujala, General Manager of Real Estate and Facilities Management. Further to your request in January in the council report, I'm going to give you an update on some of the work streams that we have been working on during that period. First of all was with respect to the framework process for strata negotiations. As you'll recall, there are 717 individual strata leaseholders. Negotiating with all of them one by one is an impossible task, so you asked for a framework process. What we did is we met with Replan, the strata leaseholder subcommittee, but we also wanted to make sure that we engaged all 717 strata leaseholders, so we sent out letters to all of them informing them of the process being undertaken. 4 public meetings have been held with the groups of the strata leaseholders, so we covered them all. Those were completed on May 24th. We are preparing a draft framework process to bring back to you for feedback. However, right now we're actually collating all the information and feedback that we're getting. And so that will be a follow-up report coming to you in June. As part of the work that you requested us to do and also which informs the discussions and negotiations as we move forward is the building condition assessments. That work has commenced. We have completed 5 of 27 building assessments, and the first draft building reports are being prepared as we speak. The last item which we're really focused on from the real estate perspective is the land governance models. We have engaged an outside consultant to actually, to actually undertake initial research work on various governance models throughout North America and elsewhere, and to do an options analysis. That work is ongoing right now, and we're waiting for their due diligence and our team meetings to complete, and we will report back to you on that also. So the next slide is actually with respect to co-ops and non-market leases, and I'll ask my colleague, Ms. Llewellyn-Thomas, to update you on that.
Kathleen Llewellyn-Thomas, General Manager of Community Services. It's a fairly simple report on the co-ops. Council approved the co-op lease framework in February 2017, and in doing so, approved 7 co-ops to be our first priority. The 7 are 8 Oaks, La Petite Maison, Northern Way, Rising Star, Vera, Four Sisters, which is our top priority and which we're actively talking about right now, and then Marina Co-op, which is in False Creek South. If you recall, the idea behind identifying those priority co-ops was so that we could test the framework and see how it's working, how are our co-op partners responding to it, and any learnings that we have as we go through those, we'll be bringing those back to council if we need to modify that framework. And the marina folk tell us, and in fact all the folk in False Creek South tell us that the co-ops down there have done some thinking about our framework, and they've reached out to ask my team to meet with them, and we'll be doing that in short order just to hear what it is that they observe about the framework, and that will also inform all the coming negotiations. And we're going to be reporting back to council on a citywide nonprofit framework for non-market housing in Q4 2017. I think that concludes the presentation, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation and all the work done in these recent months on obviously very important initiative for the residents of False Creek South, and obviously for council and city staff and the work that's we've been tackling and for not just months but years now. And we have a good list in the queue here. Questions for staff following up on this. We'll start with Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Mayor Robertson, and thank you to staff. It feels like each presentation gets shorter, which is fabulous for a number of reasons, but because it feels like it's getting more manageable, more coherent, and clearer as to what the direction is. So well, I have a few questions, but the one that sticks most urgently in my mind is the issue of the non-market leases and how the planning program, I know, Mr. Kelly, you spoke to there's some time for the leases, in some cases decades, but there are some of the non-markets that don't have that time frame available to them. So can you speak about how that factors into this planning program?
Yeah, we, as Karis indicated, there are actually about 5 streams of activity here, and today's focus is really on the planning piece. My colleagues in REFM and in community services, as well as planning, are at work on those contemporaneous streams of activity. So I think what we've designed this process around is meeting that middle part of the timeline that Karis showed, that gives clarity about to co-ops and non-markets about what are their options to remain, to rebuild, to be part of an expanded phase 1, essentially, of detailed planning, or whether the negotiations will result in them staying where they are for an extended period of time. So rather than predetermine those outcomes, we want to move those streams together and reach that point, which is about, schedule-wise, next June, so that we'll have some certainty then for all those folks about which option they want to pursue.
Second question was around public spaces, and I appreciated the reference to it. The reference, though, was to existing public spaces, so I'm interested to know how, particularly that edge treatment on 6th Avenue there, you know, it's not the friendliest place to walk along right now, or certainly not to stop if you're walking, so to ask how public spaces might be considered in that planning program.
Yeah, in the first phase, we are planning to tackle a couple of things that are relevant. One is at the principles level, to make sure that not only the preservation but enhancement of public space and green space is a part of the overall plan for the district, and also to work with our colleagues in engineering around the redesign of 6 so that it not only accommodates additional modes of travel, but actually has a much better interface and a more pleasant experience. We were hopeful early on that it might actually leave some additional space for developing some new property, so you have sort of a double loaded corridor there with development on the other side. That may be, we're going to continue to explore that, but that may be pretty pinched, so it may be that there's opportunity for a band of green, but not so much for development on that side. So we're just going to have to get in the detail and figure that out.
Okay. Next questions are around resources. It looks like staff have, you know, it's well appropriately resourced plan. Will the community have access to resources to be able to participate in the advisory function?
Yeah, we are in discussions with them about exactly how that will work. We've signaled that there may be some modest resources available for them to help, particularly on the public engagement side and information side for the effort. We do hope, one caution there is that we do hope to create a slightly more robust advisory group, so it would include Replan and many of the representatives from the neighborhood, but would also bring in citywide interests, and that will become a more formal venue for participation and making recommendations. So we're sort of navigating that piece now, what resources would go to whom in that process.
Okay. And last question was around, just a clarification. Ms. Hebert had said that the report would come back in July 2018, and that after that time, recommendations would come. I wanted to double check whether she meant at that time or whether there was an after that time and what that time frame looks like.
Perhaps I should let her answer. My understanding is, Karis, that you meant at that time, and then there would be a subsequent phase 2 process, depending on who's opted in and who's opted out. Go ahead.
I mean, some of it is going to depend upon the progress of the streams of work, and so we've indicated around June of that time we would be able to come forward with some recommendations. But again, it does require progress in those work streams.
Okay. Okay, that's your intention, though. Your hope would be to bring recommendations at the time the report comes back to council. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Reimer. Councillor Carr, questions?
Yes. Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to staff for this presentation and the work. My first question is following up from Councillor Reimer, and because I think as councillors, you probably know we've received a lot of input over time around the leasehold situation. So you did indicate that there were meetings that took place, not only with sort of subgroups of Replan, but with the 717 leaseholders. There were 4 meetings. Were they attended by the majority of, or all of, or how many of the independent leaseholders?
I think Bill Angelo is best to answer that question.
Councillor, there were 4 meetings. Letters were sent to all 717 leaseholders, which includes the commercial strata leaseholders. 35% of the strata leaseholders attended. 80+% understood and agreed with what's based on the framework that's being proposed, which is essentially a non-binding delegate to represent them. And that's the results based on 10% of the survey results that we've received so far. So we had the meetings, but in each of the letters that went to them, they could also respond to a survey that was posted online.
And that was 80% responded to the survey? Is that?
No, the 80% understood and agreed with the framework being proposed.
And that's of all 717?
Well, we've only received 10% of the survey responses back yet.
Okay, that's
just to be clear.
More clear.
We don't have, that survey hasn't closed yet. That's why we're still collating all the information, and we will report back to you in a fulsome manner.
Okay, that's important. Thank you very much for that information. My second question has to do with the advisory committee that's going to be set up, and I noticed in the report there's fairly strong language about the citywide perspectives. I mean, I will quote that there expects to be a strong diversity of citywide perspectives on this committee. That's in the appendix, page 9 or page 11. Can you just kind of give me a picture of what you know, who you mean, or what kind of perspectives, and what does strong representation mean? Like half of the committee, or a third, or I mean, just some sort of ballpark on this.
Yeah, we spent a fair amount of time sort of figuring this out, and part of the terms of reference is to authorize us to go forward and create that committee. Actual representatives would need council approval, but let's, I believe, Karis.
I just indicate that in Appendix A, page 21 of 24, we tried to break down really the citywide perspectives that we're hoping to include on the advisory group, as well as the resident interests. We want to see representation from all the tenure types in the community, as well as commercial and other community services in the area, like the elementary school, community center, Granville Island. So that really gives you a sense of it. We see affordable housing perspectives as being quite important, and our allocating about 3 spots for the range of affordable housing perspectives. That can be younger families with children, co-op from a more citywide perspective, urban design and planning, environmental sustainability. We want to also include the PEF Advisory Board as a board that advises the Property Endowment Fund on this property development community and transportation perspectives. So,
Yeah, I noticed that you did put down TransLink, Metrovan, Vancouver Coastal Health as interests. I mean, would there be representation from those kinds of bodies in this group, or are we just going to consult with them in a different way?
We are planning to consult with them. More the perspective we were thinking of for the transportation aspect would be the PED bike, and because so much of the focus is on connectivity into False Creek South, working with the various greenways that are in the area. So we'd be looking for that representation on the advisory
Do you have
group.
a sense of how you might go about choosing people? So say you've got down this one interest that is citywide, people involved as renters or in obviously accommodation in general. How would you go about choosing those kinds of people? Is there a process you have in mind?
Yeah, we'd like to put out a public call for nominations from interested organizations and individuals. And we would basically be reviewing the applications that come forward and then making a recommendation to council in the fall.
Okay. I think I'm out of time.
You are at your time?
Yes,
Yep.
I'm sorry. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Affleck is next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just regarding timeline, 14 months for phase 1 and then no timeline for phase 2. That's a long time. I'm just wondering, and I know that's challenging, and you've sort of touched on some of the challenges. In the meantime, are there any developed units or homes that are in jeopardy of not being able to finance, say, renovations or even getting a mortgage? It's getting close to certain of them. I'm wondering if, especially renovations on the co-ops, where they're looking to fix things, and if we haven't made a commitment and we haven't done a long-term plan, they may have challenges getting money to do some projects that are necessary. Are there any that we're worried about that we need to deal with?
I'd probably defer to real estate on this one, but I know part of this first phase is really to sort out that information, like what is the critical need, what are the timelines, what are the details of those needs.
Is there any way we can speed up that process? I mean, I think you said 5, Mr. Oshlav, that you've done so far of the analysis of the buildings. I think you said 5 or 7, I think.
Councillor, 5 of the 25 approximately, we just go back, 5 of 27 have been done, and we're looking at those. But you are correct, there are certain stratas that are facing immediate issues, and we will continue to work with them. We definitely want to not create a precedent without creating a holistic approach, because the land assets do represent a significant asset for the general taxpayers of Vancouver. However, in the particular situations of specific, let's say a co-op, which may come up for lease renewal earlier, or a strata that is facing building envelope issues, we'll work with them to find solutions while we work on the holistic approach.
So they can identify, if they have challenges, they contact you and say, look, potentially if they're needing a rush situation.
Well, as part of the approach to developing options that work for everybody, we are seeking essentially delegated representatives for them that are non-binding. That was the approach that we put forward. If they can get those representatives, we certainly are meeting with the Strata Leaseholder Subcommittee and replan. So those issues are being identified now. We don't have to wait. We're progressing with the work, but we also want a legitimate process so that once we have a holistic approach, people don't come out of the woodwork to say, I was not engaged. So that was we want to ensure that everybody's been engaged, but with the immediate issues, we'll continue to work on those.
You're coming back in June, I think you said, with more detail on your specific area of work, but will that include, if the things you're talking about are done, will that pick up the pace on a lot of these things and getting more than 5 of 20 something, you know?
The pace for the building condition assessments, we're actually working with an outside consultant. There is only a certain amount of pace because they have to access the buildings, they have to do that work. That we expect to be done later this year. However, for the buildings that have particular issues, we can work with them directly and reprioritize the condition assessments as necessary.
Okay, thank you. Just on Parkland and the train and things that were brought up, and Councillor Reimer kind of touched on 6th Avenue. First of all, just on the Parkland, it talks about it's access to the Parkland. We're not changing the Parkland necessarily. It's just more about access, correct?
Yeah, correct. As we get into some of the redevelopment at the edges and potentially in the future, we want to look for opportunities to augment that with some internal spaces to those development clusters. But yeah, there are no plans to sort of reconfigure the parks going into this. So it's more about access.
Okay, and has the park board had a presentation at all, or how engaged are they in this process with the board itself and staff, and have they had a presentation?
I don't believe the park board itself has had a presentation, Karis, but I know that we've been working with park staff on the development of these terms of reference.
Okay, and one thing about schools, in the report it talks about how Falls Creek Elementary, and my kids went to that school, is over capacity. At the time they were there, actually, it was under capacity, so it's interesting that it's over capacity now. I'm wondering if Olympic Village has a part to play in that, with the people moving into that area and getting into that catchment. Do we have any idea when the other school might be being built in the Olympic Village area to potentially alleviate some of the stress that's happening in the South Falls Creek area?
I don't have a prediction on that. I know we're in discussions with them about that, and I think both real estate and Karis have had conversations. Do you want to add anything?
Really, no.
Full conversation.
I know the school board has its challenges, but quite often it is based on population, and given that if the school is oversubscribed, they should be looking at that as a priority, I would think.
We have met with the principal of the elementary school, and we are aware of the capacity issue and understand that there may be some plans to actually rebuild the school in the near future. So we're going to be connecting with the Vancouver School Board to discuss that in parallel with this planning process, because clearly if we're adding some population to the area, we want to ensure that there's capacity.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Next up is Councillor DiGenova.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank staff for the very thorough terms of reference. I have a couple of questions. Some of them touch on questions that Councillor Carr had asked, and some on a question that Councillor Affleck had just asked. I was just wondering why the park board itself wasn't engaged. I mean, it's important in considering parks, public spaces, and the relationship that they will have in this process, that they're on board for that. So I understand staff have been involved, but is there a reason it didn't come to them before it came to us today?
I don't know if there was a reason it didn't come. We certainly plan to go forward to them as the process evolves. Again, we did work with the staff. We're happy to make that appearance and consult them as a formal body.
Okay, thank you. Another question, it touches sort of on the citywide perspectives and call for applications for this advisory committee that you said would have a sort of robust, I suppose, membership, and looking for people with expertise, I'm guessing, in the housing sector and sort of planning across the board, community, people to represent.
Active transportation. And some other
active transportation to represent every walk here. I'm just thinking back to some of the other city, I suppose, I don't want to say led, but also, citizen-led advisory groups like the Grandview Woodlands Citizens Assembly. I understand that terms of reference really needed some tweaking, and there was some thoughts from the community as to how the process should go through. So I'm just wondering why perhaps staff chose to put together a terms of reference before bringing together that committee, because perhaps that committee may say that, actually we think the charrette should come at a different point in time, or we feel that, we need to reach out to the park board first. So I'm just wondering why sort of B isn't coming before A in the recommendations?
Well, yeah, it's a question of where you start. I think that our intent here was to get council clarity on the overall scope and timeline and the coordination of the multiple effort streams. The details of when this charrette happens or that, vis-a-vis setting up the advisory committee, I think that we'd want their advice on the process going forward, including the engagement of the park board itself. So I don't know that we're fixing anything in particular around sequence or dates other than a very general sense.
I just see from many of our citizen, I suppose our advisory committees, even here at the City of Vancouver, each of them sort of tweak their own terms of reference in a way. I mean, we have terms of reference overall for the city, but I was just wondering if you saw that as being something that may happen when you have a bunch of experts together in a room that say that perhaps there's other ways of
why don't we say this? This would be the starting point for the terms of reference if once we get the process underway, including the advisory committee, we think this is a fairly broad and somewhat fungible terms of reference, so there's a lot of flexibility within it. But if there are requests to amend that in any way, we can bring that back to council.
Thank you. And then affordable housing, I see a lot of talk in the report about a focus on affordable housing and looking at different options, everything from co-ops to family housing. I didn't see too much specifically about seniors housing. I know that's an issue in our city. Yep. Also, accessible housing and sort of an accessible place. I know that when we looked at the Seaside Greenway in this neighborhood, there were a lot of walk-ups that we heard from our persons with disabilities advisory committee that they couldn't access. It's something I didn't see in the report, so will you be planning to bring on to that advisory committee people who, I suppose, sort of champion that in the community and look at things through that lens?
I think the general membership terms are broad enough that we could be sure to reach out and make sure we include those perspectives, both seniors and disability.
And now I'm going to ask the $64 million question. How many people will be on this?
I mean, we're trying to keep it a manageable number, and we're sort of at the upper limit of that, around 25, I think. Beyond that, then we're just essentially having one large public meeting instead of a committee. So we think that gives us a very healthy component of existing local residents in various forms of tenure, as well as an augment of citywide interests along the lines that you were just describing. So. And
subcommittees would form out of these committees?
Conceivably, yeah. Once we get into the work. We didn't want to predetermine that, but that's certainly conceivable.
Thank you. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the consultation, because sometimes there's chicken and egg, and we're trying to figure out how to do this. But I thank staff for all of your work on this for many, many years.
Well, thank you.
All right, Councillor Meggs is next.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Mr. Kelly, for the report, and Ms. Hubert. It's gratifying to see this progress, although it would have been great to see it even earlier, but it's been a long discussion. Are there any other communities in the city that you're aware of that have come forward and said, we have issues we'd like to wrestle with, and put together a planning process of their own and tried to engage the city this way?
Well, I think this is probably, in my short tenure here, this is probably the most robust coming forward that I've seen. We're certainly hearing constantly in Chinatown and downtown East Side for requests for more deeper and more substantive engagement there post the zoning piece that will come to you on Chinatown. But I think this group is very organized, very thoughtful, and fairly strategic in its reaching out to us.
At a high level, I mean, I guess it's maybe too early to ask, but I'm more interested in how the neighborhood might look at the end of this in terms of numbers of people more than I'm concerned about the numbers on the advisory committee. If so stage one is a fairly narrow look at certain specific areas while you develop the overarching project. Is it your view there'll be an increase in people down there? I mean, one of the terms of reference is the PEF is to get a reasonable rate of return, and I'm sure that's social as well as economic.
Yeah, without predetermining a number, that's certainly been part of our conversation with Replan and internally as well, that over the long term, there may be an increase of population there, and keeping a mix of affordability somewhat akin to the original intent behind the creation.
Some drift from the original mix, according to the report, so.
It could be. I mean, that's part of, we haven't predetermined what that mix is, and that's part of the discussion through the first part of the plan is what are those principles for the long term.
I think housing affordability is one of the issues, but one that I've observed as someone who lives down there too is that the original plan really didn't succeed over the long term in delivering local commercial space that you could shop at. In fact, we've seen a decline. Do you think you'll be able to find measures to reverse that? Because local shopping opportunities have been drying up, not better.
That's certainly an aspiration of ours, and I think that also needs to be discussed in parallel with the connectivity issue, like because it's a bit isolated. And so the retailers there, for example, are highly dependent on either seawall traffic or on local residents. And
they're facing terrible competition from the big box stores like Canby.
Yes, yeah.
Terrible or excellent, depending on your standpoint. Yeah. Just on the small, the three sites that you're looking at, I mean, the Olympic Village SkyTrain station is an obvious one, and it's not within the current planning boundaries, as I understand it. So it's not within the original False Creek South ODP. It's outside that boundary.
Is it outside the ODP?
Yeah.
It's inside the ODP. Anyway, it's clearly inside the scope of this effort.
Oh, inside this scope.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not been built up till now. So it's kind of a clean slate.
Yes. Yes.
Have you looked at the opportunities, and it's hinted at there, but I'd like you to say it out loud if it's the case, to use that development to facilitate redevelopment elsewhere? I'm thinking of creating swing space for people who may need to move out while their buildings are rebuilt and that kind of thing, because that would be an innovation that I think would be really worthwhile in that neighborhood. So people didn't have to leave the neighborhood while their buildings were perhaps
that's part of our, that's certainly been part of our early thinking. And we have a staff member who's working on the affordable options to remain peace, working in concert with Karis on these options and with real estate. So I think that's a potential huge opportunity there to allow some of the buildings that are not in great condition, where people may want to retain, for example, a co-op entity, but rebuild and potentially even expand.
You're thinking
this will be a place to.
Yeah. Are you thinking you come back as early as next year then? This is following up on Councillor Affleck's questions with some specifics on that, because I'm curious how quickly you could then take an agreed upon general plan out for perhaps a request for proposals to develop.
I think that our intent is to have enough clarity soon enough before we come back in about this time next year with residents and with the various organizations to say, here's some options, some real options to remain. So that would be our hope.
So I guess my last question is have staff thought through how they might then mobilize development, say, of the Olympic Village site? Would it be saying, as for example, the council did with the Oak Ridge bus terminal, here's our general view of what should happen, and invite developers to come forward on it, or is there any thought given to that at all?
Because I think that's probably the most...
There's an urgency to getting that one.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most efficient way to do it. So that's, I mean, we talked with Bill, but I think that's probably our...
So perhaps in 2018 that would...
Preferred, yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Meggs. Councillor Deal.
Yes, thank you. Just picking up on some of the threads that have already been touched on around the public realm. I'm super excited about the edge treatment work, but we also have a few other pieces that are, one is not referenced in the report, I don't believe, but is happening, which is the signature piece of public art, which we're looking at False Creek, especially the seawall, as our destination for large and important pieces of public art. So I'm hoping that that'll be part of that conversation, because I'm thinking about increased population. I'm thinking about the work we just did in active transportation down there. I've got a chance to bike it and walk it this weekend. Great job, Lon. And I'm thinking about, the constraints with the number of people who are already using that space. Now we're going to add in some large pieces of public art and more people. And I'm just curious, and then managing the connections to Granville Island and their reimagining Granville Island piece of work, as well as over to the Arbutus corridor. So there's a lot of the connectivity part that's going to have to be dealing with a lot more congestion of people walking and cycling.
Well, I know that Karis has in mind a couple of design charrettes through this process that would not only be about potential building envelopes and street connections, but could include those kinds of issues as well. Certainly, engineering will be engaged in those.
Yeah, I knew it would be, as well as the citizens will be engaged. But I'm just really interested in all those connections, both internally and externally, to other projects that are ongoing right now. And didn't want to lose track of that piece of public artwork, because the large signature pieces, once we start getting them in, could be really large. So
So
Make sure that they're not.
we may need to expedite that piece of the
Yeah, make sure it's linked in.
investigation.
And then again, on the local shopping, I mean, Councillor Meggs has already mentioned, Leg and Boot Square is infamous. It's dead. Yeah, so what are some ideas around that? I guess this is a process piece, so we don't need to come up with solutions today, but do we have a little special focus on that, or?
There will be a focus on the retailing component and how we reactivate that. It may have something to do with design and tenant procurement and curation. It may have to do with additional amenities that draw people in. It may have a lot to do with the access, improved access to the area.
Thanks very much. Exciting work.
Thank you, Councillor Deal. So we need to hear from Replan.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce a couple members if I could, Mayor. A request came to us, which we fully endorsed, that a couple representatives of Replan augment the staff presentation with their own presentation, and then there may be additional speakers in the public section. So Richard Evans and Cyrus Gramis-Webb are here to present for Replan.
Welcome.
Thank you. Mayor and councillors, thank you for this opportunity to speak. I would like to introduce you to Cyrus Gramis-Webb, who lives with his family in Spruce Village, attends False Creek School, and has founded our new Play and General Enjoyment Subcommittee of Replan.
I would like to introduce Richard Evans, who lives with his family in False Creek Cooperative, who will explain all the adult stuff, as I will explain the more serious stuff. Richard chairs and co-founded the Replan Committee of the False Creek South Neighborhood Association.
During this presentation, Cyrus and I will comment on the council report and associated terms of reference, underscore the importance of timing, particularly to enable the success of the work plan and decrease uncertainty in the community, then share a perspective from the next generation of the False Creek South community. Cyrus and I aim to leave you with a note of encouragement to continue Council's unanimous support for the work plan and your staff have accomplished together by accepting the report before you for consideration today. To begin, we want to thank staff for this report. Planning staff listened to our concerns about the timing of public engagement, lease considerations for all tenure types, meaning stratas, co-ops, non-market and commercial, the housing affordability report, and the right for current residents to remain. Leaseholders applaud that the work plan in the report before you intertwines a community plan, affordable housing, leases, and governance. Further, the report recognizes the leases as an opportunity for a broad, community-wide discussion of opportunities for green investment, appropriate infill development, and affordable housing opportunities for existing local residents. We support the intention to make sure adequate time and resources are in place for the community to engage in building substantial long-term support to implement the plan. A note of concern has emerged that delays can increase uncertainty in the neighborhood. In this regard, Replan has demonstrated its leadership and built trust in our community and can help the city find efficient paths to new leases. To this end, we recommend that staffing levels required to resolve nonprofit and co-op leases be assigned as soon as possible, so substantive progress can be made by the autumn. We also recommend public engagement of the planning process begin in earnest only when the general terms of lease renewal for all tenure types are defined and approved by council. We are concerned that work on nonprofit housing leases may not be scheduled until next year. Advancing all tenure types will increase confidence within the False Creek South community that the city's intentions are established and clear. Although this does not necessarily mean that signed leases be in place, it does mean substantive terms are generally agreed upon. Replan is ready to work with the city to meet the target date for this work in October. Replan believes new leases with affordable payment options are the key to resolving lease expiry issues and will enable us to develop a successful community plan together. We are willing and eager to play a leadership role with city council and staff to achieve this outcome. As you know, it has taken several years to get to where we are today. To help ensure we can keep our work with staff moving forward in a timely way, Replan requests that Councillor Reimer and Councillor Affleck
both of whom are familiar with the issues facing False Creek South, be formally assigned as council liaisons to False Creek South. We can learn from First Nations who focus on planning for 7 generations to ensure decisions made now protect children and community resources into the future. By working together, we can sustain this wonderful community for coming generations so Cyrus and his friends can raise their families here too.
Thank you, Richard. That was a really cool speech. And thank you to the city for letting me speak here. So, if I'm correct, some of the city's main goals are to be green, livable, and high density, just like False Creek is today. Let me explain. If I want to play a big game, like capture the flag or kick the can, there are at least 50 kids in a 200-meter radius of my front door. So within a few minutes, we can always find over a dozen kids to play. That shows density. To get to school, I walk for 2 minutes. I'm in my classroom. Along the way, I rarely see a car, but I always see a kid from our school, a parent I know, or a neighbor. That shows livability. These enclaves, which False Creek kids call co-ops, even though I just found out some are co-ops, some are stratas, some are nonprofits, they all seem the same to me. Each enclave has a courtyard with 20 to 30 trees where younger kids can make little stick houses with leafy roofs and play with fairy toys around the garden, like I used to do. That shows green. I love biking around my neighborhood, and without ever crossing a road, I can get to Granville Island, 2 community centers, Science World. I can even get to the Aquatic Center. And don't you agree? The purpose of the city is to make a living space as nice as possible so that people enjoy living there. If you look at False Creek, that's what a city should look like. It's the perfect image for planners. And I'm not the only kid who shares this opinion. If you ask any kid who lives here, they'll tell you how awesome our False Creek neighborhood is. You should make more places in Vancouver like this. And I encourage you to take a walk through our neighborhood so you can see the kids' perspective. And I'd be happy to take you for a tour. In conclusion, someone asked me at last week's city consultation meeting why I should care what False Creek will be like for kids in 2036, because I would be older. What he didn't understand is that there will still be kids here, and what you decide will determine how kids in the future will grow up. Please make the right decision on behalf of the kids. Thank you.
Graham McGarva, Chair of Replan's Community Planning Working Group, Ann Kay, Chair of our Strata Leaseholder Subcommittee, Nancy Hannum, Chair of our Joint Co-op Board Subcommittee, Nathan Edelson, our Project Manager, and I are here to answer questions about the community plan, strata leases, and non-market housing. Thank you for listening to us.
All right, thanks very much for that presentation to both of you. And we've got questions from councillors, starting with Councillor Reimer.
Hi, Mr. Evans and Cyrus. I'm sorry I didn't catch your last name, but welcome to council. Thanks for coming. A question, 3 questions. The first was about the lease issue, the sticky part of this. So as this presentation has unfolded today, so we have the strata leaseholds, which are dealt with through one department in the city. So I understand why they would bring their own report to council. And we have the nonprofit leases, which are dealt with by another department, which makes sense, but of course then necessitates other reporting. You know, they work on their own work plan. So how, I guess I'm interested in your thoughts on how it would be most coherent for you. One of the thoughts that occurred to me is that whenever one comes to council, the other is at least referenced in the report, so we understand where they're at in their process, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on how we make that work for you guys.
Well, it certainly helps. This report has gone a long way to bringing those streams together, so the council reporting in itself helps that. And it is true that it is difficult at times to deal with independent entities, but try to do a coordinated, get a coordinated outcome. And we're working hard on that. And I think all of us feel the need for that, and we're making lots of progress on that. There's certainly lots of conversations towards that end, so I'm optimistic about the result.
Okay, So if that happened, when the strata lease report comes to council next month, there was at least a section on nonprofits, so we understand where that is in the process, that would, I don't know if the word is satisfy, but at least meet some of the need to know where the two processes align.
Yeah, it certainly helps. As in this report, it bridges back to the others, and then there was reporting on those, so that helps a great deal.
Okay, that's great. Advisory committee, by virtue of your nod to Councillor Affleck and I as potential councillor liaisons, I'm guessing I already know the answer to this question, but for the benefit of other councillors, it might be helpful for you to outline how you're internally organized, because it is quite substantively different than other areas of the city in terms of how residents come. I mean, Cyrus is a great example of how you have committees that work on specific issues. So can you flesh that out a bit for us?
Well, yeah, as has been referenced, the Falls Creek South Neighborhood Association has been in place for a number of years, and not just focusing on single issues. It's been working in the interest of the neighborhood for quite some time. Falls Creek, the Replan Committee grew out of that, and as the Neighborhood Association, as a representative body of all, with representatives from all the enclaves in the neighborhood, is basically a democratically based institution. So the committee is answerable to that organization with representation from everybody. And as you can see, and as you've seen us come before you over the years, it's that base is growing. So there's more awareness in the community through the delegates, as that system's now in place, for representation from everybody. And we're continually finding new tools to grow that. And website. There's a newsletter just came out the other day, so we're getting better at it, I would say, over time.
Okay. And last question was for Cyrus. Cyrus, I would love to take you up on the offer of the tour in the neighborhood. If others couldn't do that, what would you like to show them about the neighborhood?
Well, I think our neighborhood is really awesome for kids. I think structurally, the way the neighborhood is designed is, so for instance, where I live in one enclave, and then there's an enclave here and an enclave here, and then there's little streets in between that they're like streets, but cars rarely use them. So it's as if it is a street, and I think for kids that's kind of like, oh, there's a street, we can play on it, but there's no cars. So I don't really know how to exactly describe it, but it's as if we can play on something that we could have never played on before, and we still are safe doing it, if that makes sense. And also, there's like little nooks and little gardens where, like if we're going to play capture the flag or whatever, we can hide things hide behind trees and whatever. And then there's also little entrances to all the different enclaves, so where we can sneak in if we're trying to run away from like a friend or something. So I think you
don't have to give up all your secrets here at council.
Yeah, I think the structural design is really cool.
That's awesome. Okay, well, I will take you up on the tour, but you spoke to it beautifully.
Yeah, sure. Who would I be taking on the tour? Or like?
I'll grab you a card after the meeting or after.
Awesome.
Okay, cool.
Awesome, that's so cool.
Okay, Councillor Affleck, questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just continue with Cyrus just on that. I'm very familiar with the neighborhood. I never lived there. We live in Yaletown, but because there was no school and my kids were going through school, we got to hang out there a lot, and they went through Falls Creek Elementary, my two oldest. So I'm very familiar with the neighborhood, and especially trick-or-treating, which is pretty stellar in that neighborhood, I find. It's really a fascinating neighborhood. I agree with you. I'm just wondering, for your perspective, what's missing? What do you, as a kid, what are the things, you talk about how great it is, all these things that you have. What do you need in the neighborhood that would help?
Let me just think about that. I think you guys were talking about adding more art sculptures. I don't know if someone mentioned that. I think art would be really cool, because when there's like a structure of art, then kids can say, it's like a meeting place. It can be like, for instance, if there's a big statue, it can be like, oh, meet at this statue at this time, and then we can go to Granville Island or whatever. And I think it also makes it so that there's something that you can play around, I guess. Little kids, there was once these stop signs at our school, and they were literally just like a row of stop signs. It didn't seem like much, but kids would love to run through them and whatever. So even though it was just a little piece of art, kids still really enjoyed that and would look forward to playing through them or just meeting at them, or sometimes like trying to find patterns in the art when they're bored or something.
Right.
So I think art would make a really cool contribution.
You're in grade, what grade are you in?
7.
7. So you're heading to KITS next year, probably? One of the challenges I had with, especially my son, my daughter was not so bad. He used to always sneak off and go to 7-Eleven across 6th Avenue there, which always, I thought, I was very uncomfortable with that, especially when he didn't tell me. I caught him once walking into the school with a Slurpee. I was like, what is going on here? It's lunch. You're not supposed to have Slurpee. And who gave you the money? But it turns out he had a whole business going that I found out. That's a whole other story. Councillor Meggs kind of touched on this, but the retail and access for you, I mean, I think from a family's point of view, and Councillor Reimer touched on this too, 6th Avenue, very precarious street, it's like a highway sometimes. And so when you're going out, where do you go when you're do you go to 7-Eleven and you get on your bike and you cross over 6, or do you go over the top? Or, because I'm thinking about the access to the neighborhood.
Yeah, so for us kids, our favorite place to get to, for instance, 7-Eleven or the little Unaki sushi place, we always use the overpass, because the overpass, it's quite, I mean, there's a little forest there, which sometimes I've been in there, and it can be a bit sketchy, but the overpass is really, it's really safe, and it's really cool, like the view of everything, and that safely takes you across 6th Avenue without having to deal with cars. And then you can either travel on the kind of, I think it's 7th Avenue is just, you can travel along 7th on the sidewalks, and it's not as dangerous there, and there's not as many cars. So then from there, then you can walk down the pathways along 6th Avenue, so then you don't even have to cross it using the overpass.
But definitely calming 6th or having more access across would be helpful, as opposed
definitely,
to
yeah. I think maybe, I don't know how you would be able to do this, but if you made it so that you could just walk over 6th Avenue, would make it a little safer for kids, that would be awesome.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Evans, a couple questions for you before I run out of time. Just on, obviously, the timeline, you sort of touched on, you'd like to get some stuff done, but by the fall, I'm sure staff heard that. They're going, okay, well. But, there are, and I sort of addressed that, I put a motion forward 6 years ago now on this specific issue, and here we are, 6 years later, and it sort of feels like we're just starting. I know the staff have done a ton of work, and this report is helpful. Are you... You address concerns, but the 14-month timeline, can you live with that? Is it, I know how you want some stuff by the fall, but if we can't get there, how precarious, how risky is that for some of the people living down there for their homes?
Well, I think the intentions are key here. And so if we're all trying to work together towards that timeline, we're certainly prepared to meet it. I know that there will be, and I think we're all aware that there will be things happen along the way. And I think as long as we remain to our intentions, we can talk about whatever implications there are of various things that come at us. But for our side, we are prepared, and I see a big intent on the part of your staff to do that. So we're optimistic and hopeful.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'm out of time, but thanks for being here today.
All right, Councillor Ball is next.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you both for being here today. My first question is for Cyrus. I'm wondering, how does it affect your life being next door to Granville Island? And how does that make a difference to your life and the lives of your friends?
Oh, it definitely makes a huge difference. Being next to that is it's basically being able to walk to an outdoor mall, I guess you could call it. What I do is, a lot of the time, I'll probably go to Granville Island with my friends once a week. We now can explore other places. My boundaries have expanded. So sometimes I've been to downtown once. That was pretty fun. But Granville Island is so awesome because there's like ice cream places, donut places, so you can go and buy sweets, just explore, see what's going on, check out the kids market. And I think being next to this really lively, big place where you can buy treats and see live performers and whatever, I think it's really fun to go there. And the walk is also really nice, going along the seawall and seeing the view. So I love Granville Island. It's one of my favorite places here.
Is it the safety of Granville Island that appeals to you? Like you feel safe there? Obviously getting ice cream is a great thing to do, but is it Is it because you feel safe going there by yourself, or?
I think I definitely feel safe. The seawall is quite open, so it's not kind of like an alley to get there or whatever. It's nice and open, so I definitely feel safe on the seawall. And also the new bike lane makes it also a lot safer. And when I'm in Granville Island, I usually go into the covered market, and it's also really safe there. There's security guards, and also just the environment is not so much as security guards. It's more the environment is really lively, and people are just like hustling around trying to like get their groceries or whatever. And I think it's safe there.
That's great to know. Thank you. And Mr. Evans, my other question. I'm just wondering, we're asked to pass the terms of reference today in principle. And I'm just wondering, the next two steps are appointing the committee and then engaging the public, stakeholders as they're called. So I'm just wondering, do you have any issue at all with us passing the terms of reference before we've had a chance to appoint the committee, hear what they have to say, and hear what the public have to say, or the stakeholders? Do you have any concerns there at all?
I don't have any hesitation with you approving the report as it is, and I think we've got the intentions, the wherewithal to work on the terms of reference for the advisory group and the membership and things like that. So no, we don't have any concerns about that.
So you feel sure moving forward that you'll be able to bring back the ideas to council and modify anything that needs to be changed?
Yes, I believe we can. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for coming in today. Thank you.
All right, questions now from Councillor Carr.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. My first questions are for Mr. Curtis Webb. And my first of all, I would just also love to join your tour.
Awesome.
So afterwards, I'll give you my car tour somehow.
So exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited too. My second question is around transportation. You mentioned you use a bike, but in your life, what are your sort of favorite forms of transportation? What are the means of transportation that you use and that you imagine you're going to continue to use because you prefer them?
My favorite method of transportation is, it's really simple. I just like walking places because when I'm walking, I can also talk at the same time. Biking, usually you're moving faster, you're trying to see what's going on. I enjoy biking, but that's usually for the purpose of biking. When I want to get somewhere, I prefer to walk because then it's a little more leisurely, and I can also talk as I walk. And I think False Creek is really perfect for that because there's very little cars that you need to pass getting to the places around False Creek, including the seawall. That's an amazing way to separate pedestrians from cars so that I can walk and not have to worry about crossing any streets, so I can just have a leisurely conversation and get to the places that I want to get to.
Great. Thank you for that. No, I have one more.
Awesome.
And it's because as a city, we're just going through a whole process of talking to people in the public about housing and what kind of housing options we should be focused on in the city. So you're young, I know, but if you think to your future, what kind of a house or home do you imagine you will want to live in the future?
I know a lot of kids, usually they want to live in like a big mansion or whatever. I think my personal taste of housing would be co-ops. I absolutely love the idea of co-ops because the way co-ops work, I think this is how they work anyways. It's by percentage, I'm pretty sure. And what that means is that a lot of middle-class families can live there. So when I'm older and I have kids, then that would be kind of a sweet spot for a lot of families because of the percentage payment. And the co-ops around my house, they are filled with kids. So that way, it's a great environment for kids because it's a hot spot for families.
Thank you. Really appreciate you being here and your response to questions. Mr. Evans, I'm interested in whether you in Replan have had any discussions around the advisory group, the planning advisory group, and the composition of it. There's a lot of language in our report, as I've already pointed out, that say there needs to have, it's an unusual circumstance with the city owning so much land, so we need a broader city perspective. Have you talked about how that might be balanced out in composition of the group?
Well, we're just in talks about what that would look like now, and we fully recognize the need, because it's a public asset, to consult wider. So that's just a given. We'll talk about the composition of that body. What we've been encouraging is to build on what's already there. We have the organization of the neighborhood association, we have the committee structure, et cetera. And I think that's a good base to work from. And so we're confident that we can work out what we need to do, because everybody agrees on the intentions.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
Nope, I have one more question
Okay.
though,
Mm-hmm.
and that is around the resident protection and retention plan. There's a specific language in the report about resident relocation options that are affordable. So I'm curious as to how you envision that to be. That's going to come up sooner rather than later, according to this process. And if there is a comfort level amongst residents around relocating to potentially smaller size units, if they're talking about aging in place, is that the idea, or are there other ideas?
The big uncertainty is the big issue in the neighborhood is uncertainty. What's going to happen to me when this process unfolds? And I think the issue is the potential lack of options for people, and that they will have to leave. So everybody, the language that we're starting to use, and we're talking about, let's get to a place where we have a range of options. And so people have, it puts the onus on the individual then to select from a number of things that will work for them. It could well be that there are situations where people would be in an unaffordable situation, would need to transition. I think we need to work with people, get the awareness level up about what we're doing and what options will be available, and then work towards that objective. And again, this is another thing that we're confident about being able to do, and having that language in this report goes a long way to address the uncertainty in the neighborhood. So that's really great.
Great. Well, thank you for your answers, and also for all the work and for the work of your engaged community.
You're welcome.
Okay, that is all your questions. Thank you very much for the presentations, both of you, and responses to the questions from council. And again to staff. So we have recommendations before us in the report. Councillor Reimer, are you ready to make next steps?
I am very ready to take the next steps on this, Mayor Robertson. It's a pleasure to move the recommendations in the report with a few brief comments. I think, Ms. Hebert, you referred to it at a number of junctions, the original decisions around False Creek South as an experiment. They were a fantastic experiment at the time. They never foresaw this moment in the future and what we would all be doing to try to figure out how to make the experiment endure and modernize and work with the modern context of Vancouver. And here we are after many years of trying to figure out how to take that next step on another, I hate to use the word precipice, although it feels a bit like a precipice, hopefully one that helps us fly. Time really is of the essence. I think we could spend more time designing a perfect planning process or a perfect leaseholder process or any of these things, but it's really how all these pieces come together that matters, and a bit of tolerance for ambiguity, I think, in that process is what's going to serve it the best. Having said that, I had one note I wanted to make, as well as I think maybe I'm not really in the habit of giving staff advice, but for this one, I might presume that. The note I wanted to make is on the principles. I appreciate that they'll come back after consultation with the community. I will say as a councillor that if it does not include, and I think you heard it broadly from council, some very significant fleshing out around the public space, the art, and the activities, that that would serve it well to come back with that well fleshed out. Commercial, which I think some people spoke to the retail, but I'm also concerned around generally economic activity. There's lots of people in South False Creek who work from home, and how how that's enabled and supported, what childcare looks like, how all these pieces kind of fit together around economic activity. And the third piece, which was never well spoken to in the original planning, was around the First Nations history. And we have some really great work on Indigenous design principles and other things, so how that dovetails in will be of interest to me particularly. The two pieces of advice, I'm sorry, I'm finding it hard to give staff advice in this context, so I apologize. The first is the Downtown East Side planning process really benefited from having an advisory committee that had co-chairs from the community. I think it helped balance out some of the natural asymmetry of planning processes where we have staff here and community there, that having the co-chairs of the advisory be community members just created more of a level playing field for the discussions around how the process would unfold. Given the nature, I think, for different reasons, but a similar level of ambiguity in the planning process, and that helped strengthen the process of discussing how we'd get to the conclusions on things. The second was around the leases, and to the points Mr. Evans and I were discussing. I think it would really aid all of us that whenever any report comes back, particularly on the leases, that the other, so if it's strata leases, then nonprofit are referenced. And I think also the planning process, because I suspect we're always going to have questions on it, so the more information we have, the more smoothly that process will go as the community, a lot of our questions come from the community flagging questions. I do think this is the strongest, most energized staff team I've seen on a planning process because of the complexity of that. So I would note that. And also a very strong, engaged, organized, strategic community that has had an enormous amount of patience with the city. So I did want to end with acknowledging that. And thank you for that. And excited for this next set of reports that'll come forward to move it all forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reimer. And actually, if you hold on a sec, Councillor Affleck, because I was going to move, first need a seconder. Councillor Affleck, do you want to second that? Okay. So that motion is on the floor. I'm going to jump into the queue here with an amendment to appoint a couple council liaisons, Councillor Reimer and Councillor Affleck, to serve in that capacity on behalf of council. Let's see. I hope that's friendly. Yeah, I'll check back later. And maybe I'll just make a few comments with respect to this overall. A big thanks to our staff and the Replan team and the broader community that's been so engaged in this. I agree with Councillor Reimer. We're blessed right now to have a deep level of engagement both with staff team and on the neighborhood side of things, and that is a great recipe for what lies ahead, which I have, my confidence is building after many years of not being sure where this was all going to go and how all these difficult pieces would fit together, with the default being that it keeps dragging along without great resolutions. I think there's a real opportunity here to do extraordinary work, and the building blocks that have been put together by staff and the Replan team, I think, are standing us in good stead. I think they've got us on a great course right now. So my confidence is dramatically higher, and I'm just really appreciative of all the work that's gone into this and the thought that's gone into making sure the principles, terms of reference, these really key elements of what will make a complicated work plan happen. And I'm still a little anxious about the timelines. I'd love to see things move along more readily, but I don't think we can force it. I think we've got to make sure this work gets done right. It has dramatic significance for generations to come, and obviously huge importance for the current residents of Falls Creek South, who particularly those who need their lease tenure issues resolved in the near term or buildings improved. I think there's a need for both some short-term work that's focused to ensure that everyone is that retention and protection and retention piece of residents is a key priority, as well as the important planning process to get more people into Falls Creek South. And that I found the figure in On the household mix, quite alarming to see the drop in the number of kids and families in the neighborhood over the years. We definitely want to see that rise back up. We're seeing that pattern in a number of neighborhoods across Vancouver, and that's a key priority for council to make sure we are building more housing for families and kids, and addressing the school challenges certainly that we face with schools overcapacity in the core of the city. So that's a key piece as well, and hopefully, as Councillor Meggs, I think, mentioned, that the site of the Olympic Village Canada Line station is has been sitting there long enough. It would be great to have that as a key priority to advance and get new housing, a great mix of new housing there. That is a useful tool in terms of changes we make with the neighborhood, and brings more people to a very transit-friendly site here in the city. So I think lots of great work done. Looking forward to the next report back, and again, just appreciating the commitment of time and energy and passion for the neighborhood that residents are bringing forward, and the staff team working with them. So thanks to everyone involved, and we'll look forward to report back soon. Councillor Affleck.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, Councillor Reimer ended on the sentence about patience, and I think patience is definitely something the community has had a lot of, and I appreciate their patience. I thank you, Mr. Mayor, for putting myself and Councillor Reimer on as liaisons. I think that's a statement in the willingness of council as a whole to get going on this and make change and get this project and this neighborhood move forward so that we don't have to wait any longer. And I want to thank staff and certainly the city manager with his direction. From what I've heard from the community, that the agenda is being pushed forward much faster under his direction and under the direction of all staff. So I appreciate that, and I think the neighborhood really appreciates that. So thank you for that. I'm not going to, I think Councillor Reimer touched on some key issues. The mayor did. I don't have anything more to add, and let's pull up our sleeves and let's get to work and get this thing done. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Affleck. Councillor Meggs.
Well, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and I agree that the council liaisons are a good idea. I think that would certainly have been effective in the Northeast Falls Creek process, which is complex and technical and has a lot of community involvement. I would like to thank staff for their work, but also my neighbors who've, as Councillor Affleck has said, been patient but persistent in this. And I think that for those who may be watching this, they should keep in mind that what's really happened here is the community's come forward in many ways to say they have a set of issues, but they can work collaboratively with the city to resolve those issues to the benefit both of the existing community and of the city, which has interests that are citywide, but also has a community here that's been very successful. So I think that it's exciting that we finally reached this stage. And like you, Mr. Mayor, I would encourage staff to really drive hard on the first phase of this, because the success there will drive much more success much more quickly in the rest of the project, and open up flexibility for a lot more creative thinking, I think, in the existing part of the neighborhood. It is an award-winning neighborhood, not just because it looks great, which it does, but because historically it provided really diverse sources of affordability and inclusion in the city that we hadn't seen up to that point. There were no single-family homes. There are no single-family homes in the area. I know Councillor Affleck's very excited about townhouses. There's lots of townhouses, stacked townhouses, side-by-side townhouses, and I think we could see a lot more of that. There's room to grow, both for the city's sake and for the neighborhood's sake, while protecting the aspects of this neighborhood that are so important, both to the residents but also to the city, and will, I think, be very successful if we take that strategy. So thanks to all those who've worked so hard to get here. I hope we can even accelerate the pace, because the rewards will be very great if we're successful.
Thanks, Councillor Meggs. Councillor Carr.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I too am very happy to support the recommendations in this report. I have to say, on a personal level, I'm a little jealous of the two liaisons, and that's only because of my background in having been a graduate student of Walter Hardwick when he was first establishing the Falls Creek area. So I learned so much at the beginning, and anyway, I'll be following this with a lot of interest. It's going to be fantastic. I'm confident of that with the incredible work of the community and the incredible work of our staff together. I have to agree that I think the resolution of leases, we've heard it loud and clear that is a very important issue that we need to get on with. I did hear the question raised by Replan by Mr. Evans about whether, or not whether, but wanting assurance there were sufficient staff. So I am hopeful that there are sufficient staff to really apply to this issue, and if there's more that are needed, I would be supportive of that. And that, because that is the precursor to resolving really and moving forward with so much of the planning. So it is a tight timeline with reports back in the fall and the next year. So I am hopeful that this will be a very, very productive work period where we do get those issues resolved and we can move on with planning, because it's an iconic area. And I loved the beginning when people established, were very, very clear in our staff presentation that this was designed really as a complete community. Very rare in cities to have that vision early on and to now be reinvigorating that vision. So it's an exciting time to be able to vote in support of this.
Thanks, Councillor Carr. Councillor Ball.
Yes, thank you very much. I must admit, in the beginning, I had some concerns about passing the terms of reference before the final engagement had taken place, but I am reassured by Mr. Kelly's description of what the engagement will be and that you will be coming back to council for any necessary modifications if there are any. But I do have faith certainly that the neighborhood is really ready for this and does not want any further hold-ups in any way. So I will support the motion and look forward to the ongoing information coming back to us from our two new liaisons. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Ball. And that means we've heard from all of council on the queue, and we're ready to vote on the motion, including the new amendment. We have all 10 votes present in favor, unanimous support for recommendations. So we're concluded on that for today. Thanks, everyone, for being here on this. And on to next steps. We'll look forward to that coming back soon. And we'll just take a minute for people to move around here before we shift into bylaws. Just one moment. Okay, council, we have bylaws next on the agenda. We have 16 for consideration, and I will ask if any member of council wishes to hold any of the bylaws for debate, separate vote, or for conflict of interest. And for bylaws 7 and 12 through 15, council members who were not in attendance at the related meetings may only vote on the bylaws if they now confirm they reviewed the proceedings, which includes viewing the related video clips. For bylaw number 7, that was a public hearing enactment bylaw from the hearing held February 24th and 26th, 2015. Councillors Ball, Jang, and Meggs were absent. However, on May 17th, 2017, Councillor Jang advised he had reviewed the proceedings, is therefore eligible to vote. Councillor Ball, have you now reviewed the proceedings, and will you be eligible to vote?
I have and I will.
Okay, and Councillor Meggs?
Yes, I have and I will.
Yes and yes. Okay, on 7. On bylaws 12, 13, Councillor Ball, you were absent at public hearings related to the bylaw 12, May 16th, 2017, and bylaw 13, which was December 13th, 2016. Have you reviewed the proceedings, and will you be voting on the bylaws?
I have and I will. Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you. Bylaws 14 and 15 are public hearing enactment bylaws from a hearing that was held November 5th, 17th, and 24th, 2009, with the decision made on December 1st, 2009. Councillors Jang, Louie, and myself were absent from all or a portion of those meetings. Councillors Affleck, Ball, Carr, and DeGenova were not on council at the time. When I call your name, please advise whether you reviewed the proceedings and if you will be voting on the bylaws. Councillor Affleck?
Yeah, I have and I will.
Okay, Councillor Ball.
I have and I will.
Thank you. Councillor Carr.
Yes, I have and I will.
Councillor Di Genova.
I wasn't on council at the time and I won't be voting.
Councillor Jang.
Yes, I have and I will be voting.
And Councillor Louis.
Yes and yes.
Okay, so with that, I need someone to move adoption of bylaws 1 to 16. Councillor Deal, Councillor Jang will second, and all those in favor of approving bylaws 1 through 16. Any opposed? And that carries unanimously, so the list of approved bylaws can be viewed on the city's website. We have 6 administrative motions which are to be moved by Councillor Louis and seconded by Councillor Meggs. Any discussion on the 6 administrative motions? Okay, we're ready for question. All those in favor of the administrative motions? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries unanimously. And that means we're on to motions on notice, which the first is, the one and only is the Vancouver Waterfront Initiative, which will be moved by Councillor Reimer. And I will second, and I'll ask Councillor Reimer to introduce her motion. Hey, Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Mayor Robertson. It is a pleasure to rise today to speak to this motion. Vancouver has a long history, as we all know, of work on green initiatives. However, it is actually quite behind in the Americas in terms of its work on blue initiatives, and those are ones related to water. Indeed, most of North America and South America, there is an acceptance, or historically was an acceptance, that water is, if you want people living in a place and you want industry in a place, you just accept that water must be dirty, that is an acceptable cost of being an inhabitant and having a functional industry, that things like swimming and fisheries are lost to those activities. Thankfully, there has been a lot of leadership across the continents, particularly, and of note in the motion, New York City really was the first major city to say, you know, maybe this isn't just a foregone conclusion. They started work back in the late 70s and early 80s on cleaning up the Hudson River, and were told at the time, very similar to some of the commentary I've seen on this motion, that's impossible. That will never happen. It's unrealistic. And yet, you can go now today and swim in the mid-Hudson River with no problem at all. Similarly, Chicago launched initiatives to make the Chicago River swimmable. Copenhagen, which had an incredibly polluted harbor, they don't have a river through the city, but they have a channel that runs harbor to harbor because they're kind of a bit of a peninsula there. They too were told nobody will ever swim in our harbor in the modern era, and now you can go to Copenhagen, walk downstairs and jump in the river. Indeed, many people jump in the harbor there over lunchtime to cool off. So swimmable is achievable, and it is shorthand not just for swimming, but support for recreation in and on the water. I'd also note, and it's spoken to in the motion, the issue of food sources, which I think are always important, the idea of an active fishery and shell fishery, but here has a particular drives close to home for us, a council that's worked very deeply on reconciliation. To hear the Tsleil-Waututh in particular, but the Musqueam and Squamish as well, have reference for us that 1 generation ago, they were still harvesting shellfish and fish out of the harbor, out of the inlet, out of the river. That may not have been advisable 1 generation ago, but certainly 2 or 3 generations ago, that would have been their main food source, and now it is completely off limits to them because of this psychology, this belief that water just is it's necessary to pollute water to have modern living. So what this motion proposes is to move us beyond that way of thinking and closer to the large cities on the continent that have taken such good efforts to clean up their riverways. I have heard some criticism, so I will speak to that proactively, that the timelines are too short in the motion. I would note that in the section that speaks to summer 2018, what it asks is for staff to come up with a series of quick starts that focus on measures to make high-use waterways safely accessible by swimmers in advance of summer 2018. The intention here is to get going on it, to get staff thinking about it. If their investigation of possible quick starts proves that that is impossible, then I would expect them to come back and explain that to us so that we could make a reasoned decision based on the facts. But I was not prepared in a motion to bring forward an idea that this that it's not reasonable to expect residents, children, families, visitors to Vancouver to have a right to swim in waters at some point in the foreseeable future. Because my question I would put back to you, if it's not this year they have that right, then which year is it? When are you going to accept that that's a reasonable proposition, and one that much larger cities with much bigger industries providing much greater levels of pollution to their harbors, rivers, and inlets have seemed to overcome? And when do First Nations have the right to harvest traditional food sources from the waterways? I would say that they have that right now if we have the will to enact measures to be able to do that. So I hope that you'll agree with that and support the motion so that we can get going on providing our residents with the kinds of access to water and access to food sources that literally millions of other residents of big cities on this continent have.
All right, thank you, Councillor Reimer. And to the motion, Councillor DiGenova.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question for Councillor Reimer. I just didn't see, I see a number of different stakeholders that should be consulted, including First Nations, industry, senior levels of government, and adjacent municipalities, but I don't see the park board noted in here. So I've just sent, actually, I'm sorry, I didn't send it, but I was sending over the clerk an amendment to include the park board, the Vancouver Park Board, just between government and adjacent municipalities. So I'm hoping that Councillor Reimer would consider that as friendly, but considering many of our waterways are either adjacent to or a part of our park space in Vancouver, I think that it's very important that we consult with the Vancouver Park Board. So I was hoping that perhaps the clerk could bring that up as an amendment, unless it's a friendly amendment. I haven't received it yet. Let me resend it.
Friendly enough.
Pardon?
Although I would like one clarification.
We just need to see
Yeah,
if you've got an amendment
right here.
for us to consider.
Sorry.
Yeah, why don't
I'll send it over, and I saw Councillor.
Move on to Councillor Affleck.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to go a little further, actually, to be honest. I find this, I'm a bit concerned about this motion and its direction, in that it, while I understand the motivation and the need for doing this, I find that there's, it's too specific in its direction without providing us with, I think, enough knowledge from staff. And so what I've sent to staff is a strike and replace, which I hope Council will accept. Councillor DiGenova was talking about the park board, but I would say that it goes much further than that, in that the motion, the way it's written, is too prescriptive and too policy making before we've actually had the research done. There are some holes in it. There are some questions I have regarding that, which obviously there's no staff here to ask those questions. And so what I've provided here is a strike and replace to, it has embedded in it the same motivation and the same, much of the same wording as Councillor Reimer has, but it's actually asking staff, directing staff to report back on creating the Waterfront Initiative for major national waterways and natural waterways, and where relevant, in partnership with the support of the Park Board and the Park Board staff. That as part of the report, staff shall engage First Nations and industry senior levels of government, adjacent municipalities. That's the same community input report. That there will be three specific goals for the report and for Vancouver, those are the same three that Councillor Reimer had, and that the potential waterways could include, but not limited to, because there may be others that we're not aware of that we may want to look at protecting and cleaning up and fixing. And so I'm hopeful that this is a more appropriate motion in that it's asking staff to come back to us with details, potentially policy initiatives that we could do, and a plan and a budget and all those things which are necessary. At this stage, I think that's what we should be doing for the city, and looking to staff's expertise to provide us and the Park Board's expertise, given that several of these locations in the motion are on Park Board land. So I'm hopeful I'll see support around the room on this. The impetus, the goal is the same, it's a slightly different approach. Thank you.
Mayor Robertson.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to an amendment
Mayor Robertson, I'm happy to accept it as friendly. No,
I'm-
you're not going to.
I'm not going to accept that. Yeah, I'll speak to that first and foremost. I think a key element, an absolutely critical element to Councillor Reimer's motion is getting False Creek swimmable as soon as humanly possible. That's not here, and I think it's unacceptable that we have a body of water in the middle of the city here that has so many recreational users right now, and that despite best efforts with sewer separation and various other approaches with infrastructure and dealing with outflows, we still have a body of water that's not suitable for swimming right in the middle of the city, but has people paddling and boating in it on a very regular basis. I think it captures many of the broader elements, which is fine, but it misses some key action steps that notably with False Creek and ensuring that that's swimmable as soon as possible. And I think I would assume with Councillor Reimer's motion, and certainly why I seconded it, was that staff would be coming back with an action plan, and that's inherent in the way that it's written. I don't agree with working on reports and administrative activity when we have waterways that are critical for cleanup and are currently being used so heavily. Councillor Carr?
Yes.
We need a seconder for the strike and replace. Councillor Ball will second that. Okay, Councillor Carr?
Right, speaking to the strike and replace. I, number one, appreciate the degree to which Councillor Affleck has said, look, there's a lot of sort of precursor work that we need to do here. I am nervous about, well, number one, I want to see amended Councillor Reimer's motion, because I think it's a big absence to not have the park board in there. And I will remind Council, in case you don't know, that in 2015, the park board, Commissioners Weeb and Evans actually put forward, and it was passed, a motion on this very theme. They've already initiated work on it, and they have interest in, obviously, a delegated authority in this area. So, and I wouldn't want to see it as a consulting process, such as I think is being suggested by Councillor DeGenova. I would want to see directly in the motion the collaboration with the park board. That's what I'm looking for in the final motion. And that has been at least identified by Councillor Affleck, and I appreciate that. However, and also, if I can just say that I think that the need to be very thorough in looking through the challenges here is a part of perhaps what he's suggesting, and I think that that's needed too. We have some constraints on the water initiatives because of the city water policies, and the part that the park board is intimately familiar with. We have a city water conservation strategy that is limiting the accessibility of water to improve the water quality. And I think that I would like to know for sure that we are getting back the details on how we are going to meet those challenges. But it does not, this strike and replace by Councillor Affleck does not include the quick starts, and I think we should be moving forward quickly. I think that we owe it to, pardon me? Oh. All right then, yes, I would like to amend Councillor Affleck's motion by adding in an E, and the language of E being the same as the be it further resolved part of Councillor Reimer's motion. Correct. The last, yes, starting with the be it further resolved, which is the last section. Series of quick starts, including those. Okay, then this is my amendment. So E would read the water that staff that as a first step, leaving as a first step, that staff proceed with, and then take out as a first step, proceed, yes, the Waterfront Initiative focus on focus by establishing and implementing. So take out the word on after focus.
Is there a reason we couldn't just do this for
By establishing. By establishing and implementing, that's right. Your first statement, Councillor Reimer, includes the fact that this is going to be done in collaboration with Park Board. I am assuming that will.
That's my amendment that we're coming back to because I had to email mine. I didn't get to.
I'm dealing with Councillor Affleck's now.
We have an amendment to the amendment being proposed. Okay, so we're going to go to amendment Q. Councillor Reimer to the amendment to the amendment.
Okay.
Amendment to the strike and replace motion.
It's a bit tough because we're on the second round. So the point of the language in the second, be it further resolved, that Councillor Carr was working as a base for, is that the Waterfront Initiative in that refers to the Waterfront Initiative that's been established in the first part of the motion, which is a collaboration. So when you roll it back to staff, you've now torpedoed the collaboration, and it's just our staff working on this issue as opposed to the collaboration of these agencies, which admittedly didn't include Park Board, but I am, as a former school trustee, extremely sensitive to being directive of Park Board. I would certainly want to work with them and collaborate and invite them, but I wouldn't want to be putting in a motion that they were somehow obligated to do so. In any event, I would not support this amendment the way it's worded, because the point is not that our staff proceed, but that the initiative, the collaboration, proceed on the quick starts and to establish a collaboration. So I'll be voting against it, and then I guess we go back to the first amendment and we can discuss what to do with that.
Okay. Anyone else to the amendment to the strike and replace motion? Councillor Affleck?
The amendment to the amendment, right?
Well, yours was an amendment. It was a strike and replace motion.
This is Carr's amendment to
Yeah,
mine, right?
amendment to the strike and replace motion.
Okay.
Yeah. Councillor Affleck.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll support it. I think that Councillor Carr has found a way to, hopefully alleviate the mayor's concerns. I think that if there are things we can do immediately, let's do them. If staff can find a way to do it. It is almost June, and summer starts June 22nd, 21st. So we're talking 3 weeks away from now for summer. I think this motion is somewhat opportunistic in that it's like, seriously, we got 3 weeks to get this done. But if there's something they can do that can make the, although there are photos of the Mayor Gordon Campbell swimming in False Creek about 30 years ago. I'm not sure what he was doing in there, but so I was hoping that this would alleviate the mayor's concerns, but clearly Councillor Reimer is voting against this amendment, so it doesn't look good, but I will support it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Louis.
If Councillor Affleck would read to the end of the amendment, it would read summer of 2018. It's currently summer of 2017, so that would be a year and 3 weeks to give sufficient time. I would suggest the amendment, which does say staff proceed, would preclude the reporting back, which I think is what Councillor Affleck, you had wanted in your strike and replace, just to have staff report back and give us some indication, and then describe the actions and such that we can move forward as quick starts. This, as it reads, is just staff proceed, and as your stated words, within 3 weeks. Well, that's not going to happen. And so I would also speak against the amendment because I think it is important to do some consultation, the proper consultation, involve the proper and the appropriate groups, have staff do their work, report back to us on how to go about establishing and implementing a series of quick starts, but not to just rush through the process as it seems that the amendment would indicate.
Okay, so we are going to vote on the amendment to the amendment to the strike and replace motion. And okay, we have 2 votes in favor, and in opposition, Robertson, Louis, Deal, Jang, Reimer, Meggs, Ball, and DeGenova. So that amendment does not carry. So we go back to Councillor Carr. Did you have any more to the strike and replace, which we need to consider? We're now back to considering.
Right. Sorry, just thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Unwinding here.
Yes. Without moving forward on, which I'm not going to, we've already voted on it, so I won't go back there, but without the inclusion of my amendment to the amendment, I'm not prepared to support this because I don't think it's going to move us quickly enough down the line of actually getting swimmable water that we need. And we'll deal with Councillor Reimer's motion after we deal with this in terms of making sure that there's language in there around the park board, which it desperately needs to have there.
Okay, I think we're ready to vote on the amendment.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, we have the 10 votes in, 2 in favor, 8 in opposition to the amendment. Robertson, Louis, Deal, Jang, Reimer, Meggs, Carr, and DeGenova in opposition on that one. So we go back to the original motion. And yeah, Councillor, anything further, Councillor Affleck? So I'm going to put Carr and Robertson there. I'll go to Councillor DeGenova.
Thank you. I sent in my 3 words that I was hoping would be added. I understand. I was going to ask Councillor Reimer about the budget that was associated to this because I didn't see anything here. But that being said, I'd be comfortable that it's just establishing an initiative. I would suppose if there was a large amount of money to be spent on this, that it would be coming back to council. I would just like, and I appreciate that Councillor Reimer mentioned, being a former school board trustee, sort of prescribing what any other board should do, but being a former park board commissioner, I did appreciate the word engage. So in the current motion, it says that we're to engage First Nations, industries, senior levels of government, and I think Councillor Carr touched on it also. I think it would be important to engage the Vancouver Park Board. I was happy to offer that as a friendly amendment and support the overall motion, but if we're looking at it as an amendment, it would just be to add the Vancouver Park Board, that we're engaging them. Oh. Yes. I just asked the clerk to add the Vancouver Park Board.
Is everyone okay with friendly?
Or perhaps the Vancouver Board of Parks and Recreation. I mean, take your pick.
Okay.
Vancouver Park Board, I'm happy
We
with.
are friendly with that. So
I'm friendly with that, and I just also would like to say, as I was going to say before, I don't see anything about a budget in here, and I'm quite concerned about that, but I would guess before we move forward with any significant budget spending on this, that this would come back to council after all of these groups were engaged. I'm hoping that Councillor Reimer might be able to speak to that and offer me some assurance on that. But I think that certainly 2018, although still a lofty goal, we're getting there. Councillor Carr mentioned that it's not happening quickly enough, but it's something that has needed to happen for a number of years. So I think starting somewhere is better than not starting at all. And although I appreciate that Councillor Affleck put forward a motion to look at different waterways, perhaps this can be the first and a good pilot for others in the region. Thank you.
thank you. Councillor Carr.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'm not going to risk modifying this motion once again. My point was really to get the Vancouver Park Board included in this motion, not just amongst a list of other agencies, but recognizing that they have already initiated this. And I'm going to read you the motion that was passed in 2015. Therefore, be it resolved, the Vancouver Park Board directs staff to work with interested government agencies and departments, non-government organizations, and individuals to achieve a goal of zero beach and recreational water closures in the city of Vancouver. And I think that they're already undertaking this work, and this motion regrettably does not recognize the initiative that they've already taken. Yes, they're in the list now, and I will support that because they are at least noted, but I think it's, as I say, regrettable there was not a sense of real collaboration on this since their staff are already engaged in this process. That being said, I will, which I never say that phrase, but I'll say it this time, I will support the motion because I think water quality and of all kinds of water is critical. It's a critical part of the greenest city, and I think that the addition of First Nations interest in this is a really bold and good one, and I absolutely believe that that we can make the moves on a quicker basis than has otherwise happened. It seems we slowly work towards water quality, but in this case, perhaps we can move it faster towards a one-year timeline. So appreciate that initiative.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. I'll just make my comments to this. First, big thanks to Councillor Reimer for bringing it forward. And I think it is inclusive. I'm glad to see the language. Thanks, Councillor DeGenoa, for adding the Park Board in there. I see this as very inclusive. It's great the Park Board's already initiated work on swimmable beaches. City staff have been doing years of work trying to clean up and make significant improvements. Certainly Trout Lake has improved over the years, but still has its challenges, as does False Creek. But city staff have been working on related initiatives over many years. I think what this signals here is urgency and priority, that there is a much broader engagement and that it's very inclusive. Everyone who wants to or should be working on revitalizing our waterfront and reestablishing healthy waterways needs to be around that table. We need to make this a key priority and make sure that that we do achieve it on an aggressive timeline, particularly where people are in the water, using the water on a daily basis, such as False Creek and Trout Lake in particular, which when we monitor, we look at the water quality in those bodies of water. It's always a concern in the summer when there are so many recreational users, swimmers, paddlers, and the like, and the water quality is not what it should be. So I think there's a great opportunity here. Just speak a couple of elements of this that to call out. One would be the big opportunity, the Park Board and the design work that they've contracted for the big expansion of Creekside Park, which will be a gem in the middle of our city, and potentially there's opportunity to tie in the dramatic improvements to False Creek water quality and potentially waterways into that park that help with water quality and ecosystem restoration in False Creek. Obviously it was, those were tidal flats and had lots of water moving through them historically prior to being industrialized. So maybe there's an opportunity for collaboration around the park design and integrating ways to keep the water clean and have lots of recreational opportunities there. The other piece I know the Park Board's been looking at over many years now is with Lost Lagoon and restoring a saltwater lagoon which it once was. I know the Port of Vancouver has been interested in certainly our partnership with the Port on restoring ecosystems in the harbor has had some great successes, and I know there's some interest there. We're also collaborating, working with the Port with respect to the Waterfront hub and that stretch of our waterfront that currently has the Sea Bus and Helijet and Crab over to Crab Park is a big opportunity for thriving working waterfront and restoration of ecosystems, hopefully swimming opportunities, all the rest of it. That's another point on our waterfront that is woefully underutilized right now, and there's big opportunities for great partnerships along the lines of this waterfront initiative. So I think we've got some great opportunities right now. We should be one of the great swimming and paddling and local food waterfronts in the world. We have fortunately relatively healthy marine ecosystems compared to most big cities in the world. We have in good years 50 million salmon swimming right through the city up the Fraser River and other creeks and rivers here in Metro Vancouver. We are very lucky to have whales and marine mammals swimming right into our harbor. We don't want them to be feeding on the bottom of False Creek, which I know some whale biologists were concerned about when gray whales have come right into False Creek. It's a concern. So I think this connects also to Councillor Louie's initiative around better management of the False Creek waterways. Certainly there's work through this partnership that I think can be win-wins for healthy ecosystems, good waterways for use, and a thriving waterfront as well. That has more jobs and recreation connected to it. So I see this as really important and great opportunity for us to tie it all together in a much stronger engagement and partnership across the board. So thanks for bringing it forward, and we'll look forward to the quick starts and the broader initiative rolling out. Councillor Carr?
Yeah, actually, Mr. Mayor, I just only had one point to add, and that is I would like to acknowledge that we have in chambers with us the Park Board Chair, Michael Wiebe, and would like to thank him as a councillor, to thank him for the initiative that he and the Park Board have taken in this regard.
Absolutely. Thanks and welcome, Chair Wiebe. Glad you're here to witness the magic. And I've got Councillor Reimer as the closing comments on her motion.
Yeah, there's some questions raised that I'm happy to answer, but I did because there's a bit of an arms race going on about who did what first on False Creek. To not dishonor the work that's been done really over the last 50 years on False Creek to create a more vibrant waterfront there. The group that were just here actually were the genesis of that. That was the beginning of an action that I thought actually personally had, I think, had both positives and negatives, which was the clearing of industry out of False Creek, which we paid a price for economically. But created the opportunity for the community that is False Creek South, and really the first time people became aware of this idea that maybe water was for more than dumping pollutants and toxins in from individuals and residents. And to honor Fred Ma, who we all had the chance to hear from over the last few days, and Milton Wong, who had a vision around dragon boating, and Fred was very much motivated to bring the dragon boats here 30 some odd years ago now as a way of getting people back out onto the water. The concept of recreating on the water, but not in the water, as we've heard, that can be quite dangerous. And then, of course, Raymond Louie, who's been, as a councillor through the full stead of his 4 terms, very active on these issues around, did I just, 5 terms, sorry. 5 terms, it's been a long time, Councillor Louie. I also wanted to note, I'm glad that you included the Park Board. It was my basic assumption that we always include the Park Board on initiatives, and unless they feel not included, I also wanted to note I did not include Metro Vancouver, UBC, YVR, or Port Metro, and those also would be agencies that in the course of regular business, I would expect that we would engage on this initiative. So I flag that in case anyone thought they wouldn't be engaged, or in case they didn't want to be engaged, we would always intend to engage them. There was a question about money and like how staff engage with this. This has been the same for my time on council, I think for Raymond's or Councillor Louie's entire 5 terms, probably since the history of Vancouver began, but to reiterate that every single time staff need to spend money to do something, it must come back here. That's where those reports come from on our agenda each week or every other week. And additionally, any significant policy changes related to this waterfront initiative would also have to come back. So to satisfy your concern, Councillor DiGenova, that the staff do bring back requests for money and policy changes to council 100% of the time, and that would be the same with this motion. The last thing I wanted to just note, it was referenced that First Nations were stakeholders, and it's such an important issue. First Nations are not stakeholders in City of Vancouver processes. We have taken the step of making the motion to acknowledge their unceded traditional territory, and along with that comes an obligation and an understanding that they have title and rights on this territory that put them well beyond a category of stakeholders. So out of respect to them, I wanted to note that and hope that moving forward we can be a bit more careful with the language around that.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Reimer, and we're ready to go to vote on the Waterfront Initiative motion. Okay, we have unanimous support, 10 votes in favor of the Vancouver Waterfront Initiative. Thanks, Council, for that, and thanks again, Chair Wiebe, for being here on behalf of the Park Board. We'll look forward to that partnership together. And that means we are on to a notice motion, new business inquiries and other matters. We have one item of new business to consider, which is the request for leave of absence for Councillor DiGenova for any meetings to be held the week of June 19th, 23rd, 2017. Moved and seconded, and all those in favor? Any opposed? And that carries. Thank you. And any other new business? Councillor Carr. Actually, let me just jump in here. Why don't I do this before? I just wanted to take an opportunity before we go farther to acknowledge the passing of Grace McCarthy, which I know many even here in Vancouver are marking her passing and celebrating her life. She obviously made great contributions to our city, a 3-time Park Board member, MLA for Vancouver Little Mountain, and Canada's first female deputy premier. She obviously played an instrumental role in Expo 86, bringing that to Vancouver and putting our city on the map globally. And through that major event, she started the first toll-free helpline for children here as well. And many don't know, but lobbied to broaden the home ownership credit legislation to include single, divorced, and widowed women without the need for a male guarantor, which was a breakthrough in its time. It's something that obviously we take for granted these days, but Grace McCarthy worked tirelessly here in Vancouver, and we certainly owe her a debt of gratitude for all of her commitment, time and energy into our city, and just want to express condolences and our thoughts and prayers with Grace McCarthy's family and friends as they celebrate her life. So that's something I just wanted to start off before we dive into the rest of new business and inquiries and other matters. Councillor Carr?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'd actually like to stand today and offer my congratulations to the leaders of the Green Party and the New Democratic Party provincially in their collaborative decision to form a stable minority government with a plan to provide votes in support of confidence motions by the Green Party to the NDP for 4 years. And I think but separate votes on other issues and a real clear commitment to actually work not just between those two parties, but across all party lines in the legislature. Mr. Weaver has made it very clear as the Green Party leader that motions should come forward from the Liberals and be discussed and talked about and supported once potentially modified, but supported by the other two parties, so that there is just a very different kind of government, a different approach, a different set of attitudes rather than the more combative nature that we've seen in the legislature, a more collaborative and more cooperative process taking place there of decision making. Now, we know that the government at this point is still not perfectly clear. We know that there is a minority government by agreement between the Greens and the NDP. We do not know yet the decision of Premier Clark in terms of how she plans to move forward. So there is a period still of, I think, uncertainty regarding when a new government may be put in place. But my question at this point, Mr. Mayor, is that will the city, specifically through the mayor and council, take the opportunity that is really being presented by a new government provincially to meet with and to present priorities of the city to that new government? And my hope is, and I'm looking for a reaction to this, that I suggest that our presentation to the provincial government reflect the tenor of the new government, which is a more collaborative across party line sense. So my hope is that the city will take this opportunity to mirror, in a sense, and to affirm the positive nature of that new provincial government by making sure that we across party lines move forward with suggestions as to the priorities of the city to that new government.
Okay, was that a question or what? You
Well,
just
I'm looking for
a statement?
It was a statement about. It was a statement about how I feel, and if there could be a response, that would be great. But I'm not. Yes, I'm testing the floor here.
Yeah, as we've discussed earlier, we certainly I'm reaching out to the two leaders of the Green and NDP to, just as I have with premiers prior, and we still don't know exactly how this will settle, but obviously we have deep staff-to-staff relationships with the provincial government. I will continue in my capacity as mayor to connect with Premier's office, which I think will be a little different going forward, given it's a coalition, although they're not using that word, but between the leaders, Andrew Weaver and John Horgan. Until we know more about exactly how the structure will work, but certainly making efforts to reach out and build those connections at a political level. We will obviously do the same, and city manager can speak to the staff side of that.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to update you on what we're doing through the corporate management team table, so including parks and libraries and police and fire, obviously, with all of the department heads. We actually brought in some outside expertise from UBC Political Sciences just to help us understand the dynamics of what may happen over the next couple months, and so we've been doing some work as a group, which is important given that a number of us are not familiar with this political system and coming from the United States are trying to understand what is going on here. Yeah, ours is so simple, particularly right now. So that we're doing that. Concurrently, we're evaluating what areas we're concerned might be delayed because of this transition time, and so we've got a kind of a watch list of topics that we're engaging with the staff at the province that we've been working with. We've also done a matrix of the different party platforms, and again, creating a matrix of where there's alignment for the issues that we will have opportunities to drive forward. So we're creating our short list of priorities and going through the charter change requests and the various requests we've had of the province over the last number of years, and really creating a short list of what we want to try to achieve during this window of opportunity, and council will be happy to share that with you as we develop it. And we're also creating one that's department by department. So from a safety perspective, what are the top things that we want? From a parks, nature, open space perspective. And so we're kind of going through our various portfolios to establish our priority list, and we'll get that shared with you, Council. And on top of that, we're putting, of course, Council priorities that we understand: campaign finance reform, split assessments, the various things that you've directed us to work with the province on. So those will be included as well. So I just want to say we're working very, very actively as a team to be proactive and take advantage of this opportunity, but also to be shoring up areas where we have risk or we're concerned about delays.
Okay, Councillor Reimer.
Well, it's so positive to hear about campaign finance reform being on that list. I would just simply flag that it's very hard to make a hierarchy of urgency. I would say some of the social issues have a higher latent urgency. Logistically, if campaign finance reform is not passed by the fall by the legislature, it becomes moot for us in the 2018 election. So I just sort of highlight and emphasize that the timelines on that are extraordinarily short for it to have a relevance here in the next 5 years, because if we mix that window, we miss the 4-year period after that. So I did rise on a couple of things. I had 2 items of information and 1 set of questions for City Manager. So this attractive bird wasn't intended to be a fashion statement today, but rather an announcement of the new city bird, which is the Anna's hummingbird. It was announced Thursday after the last council meeting, so May 19th. It was a short election which favored speed, and the hummingbird, of course, did well in that, taking 42% of the vote. I don't think it hurts that its name is Anna's, so it was at the top of the ballot. It beat out the flicker at 32% of the ballot. Not surprisingly, the next one alphabetically down the line, and then you had the varied thrush and the spotted towhee coming in at 12 and 13% respectively. So moving on from here on out forward, Anna's hummingbird will be representing the city as our official city bird, including at the the largest ever international birding conference will take place in Vancouver next August, which is what the bird contest, the permanent bird, was timed into. The second thing I wanted to just flag for folks, because it's work that you initiated here at Council through the 150 plus place naming motion, was that staff were able to, through some quick action and willing to give up their holiday Monday, able to pull together an Indigenous design workshop in Vancouver with representatives from the Pacific, primarily the Maori, but also some South Pacific folks who are traveling to Ottawa for the first ever Indigenous design conference that's happened in the world. So it was really a fantastic opportunity to sit with staff and really dive into some of the key elements of Indigenous design guidelines that exist around the world. Last thing was questions for staff. There were a number of procedural issues that were raised during the public hearing over the last week. And 2 in particular I was looking for some follow-up on. The first was the question of translations. It was the most recent update to the procedure bylaw that allowed at all for translators, but there were some memorable issues raised around how that impacts the fairness of the time that's allocated to speakers using a translator. I know that staff have been working on a subsequent update. I appreciate process takes time to ensure the integrity of the process is maintained as changes are brought in, but I was looking for an update on the timelines for those changes. The second thing was there were individuals who came to various councillors with, and I think some video footage, and I know myself, I witnessed some situations where speakers did not feel entirely safe either in the chambers or out in the waiting areas, and I would like some follow-up from staff on that to get a sense of both how serious those issues were. I heard some issues downstairs were particularly bad, as well as how we might mitigate for that in the future, noting that it was an extraordinary circumstance and staff really went above and beyond to try and make it as comfortable and accessible and safe for everyone as possible.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Reimer. Councillor DiGenova.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I have a few inquiries, but before the inquiries, I'd just like to congratulate, I know we were all here in council chambers, but the YWCA had their Women of Distinction Awards yesterday, and there were many women from the community overall, but especially from the city of Vancouver, who were honored for their great work in our city, so I just wanted to note that. I had a few questions, perhaps I could direct towards our city manager, and there could be some follow-up regarding the 420 event. And again, I understand that the costs have risen again this year and were higher than ever before. I understand that the park board has sent an invoice off for a portion of that to the event organizers. However, Sunset Beach, that area of the lawn, is still closed. I'm just wondering if perhaps staff could provide a memo in the future of what we see this looking like if we don't reach sort of a event permit or agreement or situation with the organizers for next year. I think it's important to plan a year out. And also there's been some talk in the media that event organizers are giving the city $150,000. That was a statement made on Global TV by Jody Emery. So I just was hoping that perhaps staff could report back to council on if indeed we have received that $150,000 and how much they would be short of meeting our costs that largely fall on the backs of our taxpayers for policing. I understand staff assistance and all of the other costs incurred. So that would be helpful. I've also received, and I know that council has because the emails have come to mayor and council, some complaints and allegations regarding a pet store that may or may not be selling puppies from a puppy mill as well as other animals. And I understand some municipalities have very strict and stringent guidelines or passed bylaws surrounding this. So I was hoping that staff would also be able to follow up with us on that particular complaint that we've received about one store in particular, but also across the board as to the City of Vancouver's policies surrounding that and the possibility of puppies coming from puppy mills. So that would be good. Also, I appreciate Councillor Reimer bringing up the issue of translators and people not having enough time. I think that we all heard loud and clear from some people that was especially hard for them. And I just wanted to add to that as being the liaison to the Persons with Disabilities Advisory Committee, I know that one of the recommendations that they have made to council is also to be able to provide sign language, people there as interpreters to be able to make sure that our events are accessible. I think that it's great that we've made our doors accessible to council now, but if we could sort of look forward into the future as to how we would plan that, or do we have a section on our website where people know that that's where they can get their help and translation. We also heard from people who couldn't sign up because our website is in English, and although they could call 311 and perhaps speak to someone in another language, they didn't realize that. So is there going to be a way that they could sign up on our website? I suppose this is a question that can go through the clerk, where it clearly states sort of how much time they have, that includes translation, and that this is how they sign up, so we don't have one person signing up with their name for somebody else who clearly could and would like to sign up for themselves. So those are just things that I would like addressed, and I also had it on my list. I voted for Anna's hummingbird myself, but I also heard some protests that the Canuck crow was not included in the contest, so I just had to point that out there. Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Ball.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank you especially for acknowledging Grace McCarthy. Grace McCarthy and her political partner, Doug Mowat, were enormously supportive of a number of the buildings that are built for culture in the city, and without their really hard work politically and in every other way, those buildings would not be here. And that kind of enormous support and hard work behind the cultural organizations just made for a much richer city that we all enjoy today. So Grace will be much missed. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. Okay, that's all for new business inquiries and other matters. So we are done with our agenda. We just need a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All those in favor of adjournment? Any opposed? And that carries. We are adjourned, and we will shift into in camera. We'll be back this afternoon at 2 o'clock in council chambers for our committee meeting.